Are you wondering why traumatic memories are so persistent and so painful? And what does it mean to process them anyway? Stick around and I will answer these questions and let you know the main reason you need to dive into them in order to get over them. I'm Barbara Heffernan, and my mission is to help you live a more joyful life. I am a psychotherapist and I have been helping people recover from anxiety and trauma for over 15 years. For videos designed to help you lower your anxiety, recover from trauma, and live a more joyful life, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified every Tuesday when I release a new video. Why should you or a loved one have to go into a painful traumatic memory in order to recover? This video will help you understand how doing so will help you or your loved one feel better. In this video, I will explain first how traumatic memories are formed, second, what it means to process traumatic memories, third, the main reason you have to dive into them to get over them, and fourth, the number one thing that you can do to help yourself begin the recovery process now. To explain how traumatic memories are formed, I'd first like to use the example of something that is a very common experience, happens to most of us, and is an upsetting event but not traumatic. And that would be a fight that you might have with a loved one or somebody very close to you. And while you're having that fight, you are probably experiencing a lot of physiological arousal. Your heart rate might be up, you might feel hot, sweaty, or you might feel nauseous, shut down, numbed out. Whatever your normal response is to physiological stress, you are probably feeling that during the fight. And then maybe if the fight isn't resolved immediately, for a few days afterwards, as you think about it, you will be experiencing that same physiological arousal. But over time, and as you work things out with that other person, that physiological arousal will go down, and you will no longer feel it when you think about the fact that you fought. So 6 months later, you might be able to say, oh yeah, remember I had that fight, and that was lousy, but I'm not re-experiencing it. So you will have naturally become desensitized to that memory. And then probably, as you are processing the memory and thinking about it and working it out with the other person, your thoughts are also probably reprocessed in a natural way as you go through that. So for example, during the fight and right afterwards, you might be thinking, wow, that person is such a jerk. I can't stand them. This is intolerable. Or, this is the end of my life. This is the end of the relationship. I'll never get over this. But as you process it, as you work it out with the other person, as you think about it, maybe talk it over with a friend, eventually you might begin to think, I was really stressed that day and they were really, really stressed that day. And I understand why we had that misunderstanding. And you have changed how you think about the entire event. Or you might also get to a place where you're like, okay, this person has this habit that really annoys me, but I love them anyway. And that is also reprocessing how you think about the event. So that is how our brains naturally deal with, process, desensitize ourselves to upsetting information. However, when we experience a traumatic event, it means that our system is overwhelmed. It is beyond our capacity to deal with it. We are completely in fight, flight, or freeze mode. And when that happens, our adrenaline spikes, our cortisol comes up to bring the adrenaline down, and cortisol shuts off our hippocampus. And the hippocampus is the part of the brain that helps memories move out of the limbic system and into long-term memory. Now we form memory in the present moment, bringing in all the sensory information of the moment. So when that is traumatic, that is an overwhelming amount of sensory information, and that all gets lodged in the limbic system, the emotional brain. And our emotional brain has no sense of time. It has no sense of yesterday, today, 6 years from now. It is just there and it is alive. And traumatic memories in the limbic system often don't have a full storyline because the part of our brain that creates full storylines is our cognitive brain, not the limbic system. So those parts of the brain really don't speak to one another well when we are under enormous amounts of stress. So this is why people who've gone through trauma may remember just flashes of moments. They might remember sounds, smells, physiological responses, blips of an image, but not all the details that went before or after. And that is what a traumatic memory is like. Before I go on, would you please comment below and let me know if that explanation of how traumatic memories are formed made sense to you? And if not, let me know whatever questions you have. What traumatic memory processing means is to help move that memory out of the limbic system and into the long-term memory. You won't forget the memory. I do have clients who come to me and they say, Barbara, I just want to forget this ever happened. Well, that probably won't happen. We don't have the tools and techniques for that, nor am I sure it's the greatest idea. However, we can move it into long-term memory where it will be like, okay, I remember that happened, but it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 years ago, and I'm not physiologically experiencing it now when I think about it. So that is the goal of traumatic memory processing. And how do you do that? There are a couple of techniques that are very, very useful for this. EMDR therapy, trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, somatic experiencing. All of those are techniques to process trauma. Generally, traumatic processing is done with a trained therapist, and I do recommend having somebody who's trained specifically in trauma. And a key component of processing traumatic memory is that you move in between feeling safe in the present moment and remembering the trauma and feeling all the feelings of not being safe in that moment, and then feeling safe, and you move in between those physiological states, and that helps the memory move into long-term memory and be fully processed. The third thing I said I would cover in this video is the main reason that you have to dive into the memory in order to get over the memory. And that is that avoidance does not work. Avoidance is a pretty normal response to a traumatic event. It makes perfect sense to want to avoid anything that reminds you of that event, any person, place, thing. It also makes sense to want to avoid the feelings that you had and to avoid thinking about it. But unfortunately, avoidance doesn't work, and it's one of the main symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And then we can also think about the ways that we tend to avoid. Often we try to avoid with alcohol or drugs or an eating disorder, working too much, sexual addiction. All of these things are ways to escape from our feelings, which I don't really need to explain, in the long term create way more problems than you would have if you hadn't used one of those avoidant techniques. And then there's the more subtle ways to avoid, and I would throw into that bin the issue of numbing out. And why is numbing out a problem? Numbing out is a problem because when you numb out to painful feelings, you unfortunately also need to numb out from happy feelings. And people who have been practicing numbing out for years and years and years until it's a habitual process, they generally end up feeling that life is not really even worth living, and that's not a good place to be. And another way that we avoid these memories and thoughts of trauma is to sublimate the memories. And the problem with that is that they are still in there, and something can trigger that physiological response, that panic, the upset, the anger, and we won't even know what triggered it. It could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be a particular dynamic between two people, and that just stays in there and recurs. Our limbic brain holds on to memories in terms of patterns and schema, and it is incredibly persistent, and it is very hard to dislodge those things. So sublimating does not work either. And all of these avoidance techniques, all of them, actually reinforce the fear. The fourth thing I mentioned that I would cover in this video is the number one thing you can do now to help with this process. And all trauma experts today agree that the main thing somebody needs to do prior to beginning traumatic memory processing is to be able to access feelings of physiological safety. So Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, Francine Shapiro, the founder of EMDR, Daniel Amen of Amen Clinics, Peter Levine, the creator of somatic experiencing, Lisa Najavitz, who wrote Seeking Safety. There is consensus that the first thing somebody needs to do is to be able to access feelings of physiological safety. To dive into the key concept of physiological relaxation and obtain the tools to do so, sign up for my online course. I call it the mini-series, and it is exactly the guided visualizations that I do with my clients in my office to prepare them eventually for the traumatic memory processing. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me know that I'm on track, and it helps motivate me to keep producing videos that are useful to you. And please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified when my videos are released every Tuesday. And let me know in the comments below what you think of this concept of you have to dive into it to get over it. And I know this is a really, really difficult thing to do, but I want you to know there is a light at the end of the tunnel.